Hey everybody, welcome back. In one of our earlier worksheets, we worked on a grading spreadsheet where we were learning about the kind of the basics of how to enter formulas and do relative versus absolute addressing. And today we are going to revisit that worksheet. This is actually a modified version of it. In the previous worksheet, all of the information was in a single table on one tab. In this case, we split things up. There were a number of homework assignments that were in individual columns, and instead of having that all in one table, we've created a new tab called HW for homework, and we've placed the information, the scores from that tab on this second sheet. Now this is kind of a relatively common thing to do in Excel. A lot of times you have data that are so complex that it just doesn't make sense to have it in a single table. And so the scenario here is that you would put the information in a separate sheet, and then on the main sheet you would just refer to the homework totals here using an address. And now, because we've done that, there's some interesting things that happen, and we're going to use this use case here to illustrate something really powerful called the VLOOKUP function. But to get things started, though, so we have the names here in column B, and we want to reference the scores on this page. So in column H, we have the homework totals, which are summed using a formula that sums all of the cells to the left, and that's a relative address, as we learned about last time. And so we want to basically look up that score and copy it over here, and to do that we just do that with a very simple expression, a little formula. Let me zoom in a little bit. So we're going to type equals, and then the question is, how do you reference a cell on another sheet? Now that's pretty easy, actually. You just, after typing equals, we're going to click on that sheet, and then I'm going to highlight that cell and hit return. And you'll notice up in the formula bar up here that it says equals HW exclamation H7. So the first thing we've learned in this exercise is when you reference a cell on a sheet other than the current sheet, the way you do that is you type the address is the sheet name exclamation and then the normal cell address, the letter and the number. And if you have a sheet that happens to have a title with a space in it, you would you'd use single quotes around the name. So I mean, we could do the same thing here. We don't have to, but I could type single quote HW, single quote, enter, and that works. But you don't need that if I actually got rid of them when I hit enter. But if you have a tab that has spaces in the name, you need to do those single quotes. So that works, and then I'm just going to double click there to copy that down. And now you'll see, let's just randomly pick one of these, Bart Smart. These are made up names, as you can tell. And his score is 77.9, and sure enough, 77.9. So, but let's do something here. That suppose that you're looking at the homework scores and you decided, well, that's nice, but I want to sort these scores in to see who got the highest score and who got the lowest score. So I'm going to select this table. Let me zoom in on this sheet as well. And then I'm going to go up to the data menu and the data tab, and I'm going to pick sort. And when I selected that table, I purposefully selected the header in addition to the data part of that. And so now I can say sort by HW total, sort on values, order is largest to smallest. Okay. And what that does is it sorts the entire table based on the values in column H, the homework total table. Now, so let's look at something. Right now the one at the top is Mike Marks, and he has a score of 86.4. So if I go back to this table and look up Mike Marks, it lists the homework as 77. So the problem is I've got a formula here referring to H11, row 11, column H. But when I sort that, his score is moved to H7. So this link is only going to work if I don't do any sorting on that other page. And sometimes it's really common to want to sort things but still have your link work. So it turns out there's a simple way to fix this. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to delete that. And I'm going to put a formula that goes over here, and instead of saying always look on a particular row, what it does, it says, okay, look through this table until you find a certain name, and once you've found that name, go over a certain number of columns and then return the number you found. That process is what's called a lookup, meaning you look through one column and then determine what value to pick from another column on that same row once you've found what you're looking for. And we do that. There's actually such thing as both a horizontal and a vertical lookup. What I just described to you is a vertical lookup, and that's what we use probably 99% of the time. And that's accomplished with the VLOOKUP function. And there's an entire chapter in the Excel VBA primer describing the VLOOKUP function. And so we're going to type equals VLOOKUP, open paren, and the first argument to this function is a lookup value. So that's the thing that you want it defined in the table, and that would be the name. So I'm going to do a relative reference to the name just to the left of this function. So that'd be B7, because I'm going to copy this formula down, and I always want it to look just one cell to the left for the lookup value. And then we'll do comma, and the next thing is the table array. So this is the table you want it to look in, and for that I'm going to go over here and I'm going to select everything from B7 to H21. Now let's talk about this for a second. You'll notice that I didn't select column A. I made my selection start in column B. That is because it's always going to look for the lookup value in the first column of the table you've selected. So you always have to make sure that those lookup the lookup items are in that first column. And then you have to extend that selection far enough to the right that it includes the column from which you want to return a value. In this case, it's the last column in this particular table, but that's not always the case. And something else that's really important, this needs to be an absolute reference, not a relative reference. And so I'm going to push F4 here. Let's see, F4. Well, no, I'm going to have to do that in a second. F4, well, it's not working, so I'm going to type $B, $7, $H, $21. The function lock is turned off apparently. So I'll just type that in because, and I'll explain that in a minute, but the next thing we enter is the column index, and that is once you've found a match, from which column should you return a value in the indicated table. And we want to return a value from the homework total table. So we're going to say, okay, march down this until you find a match, and then go over and return a value. But something very important here, that column index is relative to the table, not to the sheet. And so H is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's the 8th column in the sheet, but it's only the 7th column in the table that I've selected, because my table starts right here in column B. So I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I'm going to enter a 7 for that. And then the last argument is an optional argument, and that is the range lookup. And that should be true or false. And you can, if what that means is a range lookup means you have a set of numbers in the first column that are sorted in ascending order, and you don't necessarily need to find an exact match. You need to find, you're going to give it a number, and you want it to find the column where it's just, above or below that value. That's not what we want to do here. What we want to do here is find an exact match. So we're going to type false. So that gives us an exact match. And once you start typing, it'll show you the two options there. The only two options are true and false. And this is important because by default, if you do, this is an optional argument. If you leave that argument off, it means you are, in fact, doing an approximate match, not an exact match. I found for people who are using the VLOOKUP function, this is a very common error. They leave off that range lookup argument, and thereby having it revert to the default, which is an approximate match, when in fact they want an exact match. And that can lead to a lot of errors, and they're kind of hard to track down and figure out. So my advice to you is don't ever just accept the default. You should explicitly type true or false, and you should think it through carefully every time. Over time, with practice, this will become second nature to you, and you'll be able to distinguish between an exact match and an approximate match. But to begin with, I definitely recommend that you explicitly type that out. So we want an exact match, so we're going to type false, and then we're going to type enter, and let me copy that down. And so our example that we looked at a minute ago was Mike Marks, 86.4, and sure enough, now it gets 86.4. Let's look at another one, Marcy Darcy, 69.2. Marcy Darcy, 69.2. So now you can sort this table all you want. Let me resort it to be based on name in A to Z ascending order. And let's see, Freddie Franks 59, Freddie Franks 59, everything's working just fine. So that's the VLOOKUP. Now, by the way, one of the things I kind of jumped over a little bit was this issue related to the table being an absolute address. Okay, that is very important. Oh, there we go. I got the F4 key to work. I had my function key lock turned off. The reason we do that is because if you think about it, I'm going to enter this formula right here, and it's referring to that table. It's on the other sheet, but still the relationship of the rows and columns of that table to the current cell is designated in that. And had I left that as a relative address, when you copy it down to these the remaining rows in this column, it would have referred to a shifting set of cells in this table. So for the first cell, it would have been here. For the second cell, it would have been this table. For the third cell, it would have been this table, and so forth. And that's not what we want. No matter where we copy this in this column, we want it to refer to exactly the same set of cells. So you can see watch this formula up here as I select a cell and then kind of scroll down through those, through those cells. You can see this first address changes, but the next one stays the same, and that's how we want it. So, another little thing to remember when you're using VLOOKUP is you almost always want that lookup table reference to be absolute, and you almost always want the lookup value, the first argument, to be relative. Okay, so that worked out great, but we're not done. There's another way we can use this VLOOKUP here, and that is with the grades. So what we have here is over here in column H, we have computed a weighted score for the grades, and none of them are super high. I used a random number generator to fill in this table, so it doesn't quite have the spread you'd normally see, but that works. And what we want to do now is we want to say, well, if you got a 74 or 75, let's go look in the table. So, you know, anything between a B minus, or excuse me, between 73 to 81 is a B. 81 to 86 is a B plus. 86 to 89 is an A minus. 80, no, excuse me, I'm doing this incorrectly. So 73 to 81 would be a B minus. 81 to 86 would be a B. 86 to 89 would be a B plus. 89 to 93 is an A minus. And anything over 93 would be an A. Now, we could, if we wanted, just look at this number and go over here and manually do that calculation. But that's, you know, the whole point of Excel is to automate calculations like this. And again, we can do that with the VLOOKUP function. But in this case, this is not an exact match. This is a classic example of a range lookup. The scores that we have here are not going to match here, but we want to have it set this up so that if it falls within two numbers, it picks off the corresponding value in column B. And we do that using the same VLOOKUP function, but in this case, we do an approximate match. So let's go right here. And we're going to type equals VLOOKUP, open paren. And we're going to look up this value here, 87, comma. Our table array is going to be right here, so don't include the header. And then I'm going to do F4 to make that absolute, and it works correctly now because my function key lock is on. And then the column index, once we find a match, we want it to return it from the second column of the table, so that number is 2. And then finally, the range lookup is true. And we hit enter, and sure enough, we get a B minus, which is correct. And we'll copy those down, and yeah, everybody's getting C's and B's. Let's go in here and jack up some scores, shall we? Let's say you got 100 on this one for Mike Marks, and maybe 95 on this one, and 95 on this one. Now we're at an A minus, so there we go. So again, the beauty of this is you change the inputs here, the scores, it'll automatically compute not just the total, but it will then go over here and using a lookup table, calculate the corresponding set of grades. And furthermore, you can come in and change your breakpoints here on the grades, and everything is automatically updated in terms of the scores, and everything works great. So that is a range lookup. Now again, when you use a range lookup, the items in the first column have to be sorted in ascending order from small to large. If you have those out of order in any way, that it's not going to work, and it's not going to do the lookup correctly, because again, it starts at the first column, excuse me, the first row, and it keeps going until it finds a case where you know, the value you're looking up is between the number and the next number in the list. And so that is our introduction to the VLOOKUP function. We've seen it now on 2 separate examples, and this is a great little tool to have in your toolbox when working with Excel.